Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. El Salvador has a new president and a new party in power for the first time in 2 decades. The candidate for a former leftist rebel group turned political party scored a decisive victory over his conservative opponent. On this edition of Independent Sources, we talk with a journalist who has been covering the elections about the implications for El Salvador, for the U.S., and for Salvadorians living in this country. We turn an analytic eye to coverage of the economic crisis. We talk about immigration issues at the St. Patrick's Day Parade, and we check in on a publication that faced a peculiar challenge. But first, the election in El Salvador. On Sunday, former TV journalist Mauricio Funes defeated Rodrigo Avila. The two men represent opposite ends of the political spectrum. Members of their respective parties fought against each other during El Salvador's 12-year civil war. Joining me from El Salvador to talk about the election is Roberto Lovato, a journalist with New America Media. Welcome, Roberto.
Hi, glad to be here.
Much has been written about these elections. How important are they, and is this a transformative moment for El Salvador?
Transformative is a good word, but I actually don't have the word in my vocabulary to describe the importance of what's happened here. Let me just describe what I saw last night. I saw the richest neighborhood in El Salvador, Salvador's gigantic, colony of gated communities, filled with children, teenagers, mothers, grandmothers, families with red shirts, red flags, chanting revolutionary songs joyously at the victory of the first left president in the history of El Salvador in 130 years. A country that's been dominated by military dictatorships and oligarchs for that entire time.
Well, you mentioned red. What is the significance about the color red in these elections?
Red has to do with the red of the blood of the martyrs of the revolutions. It's a word that's still used here. People don't talk as much about hope and change here. They talk more about revolución, because it's a different political context. There's a respect and admiration for the political system of the United States, but the comparison between things in the United States and things here is irrelevant, in fact. The United States isn't irrelevant to El Salvador, but the political comparison is actually kind of colonial, I'd say, even.
Speaking of political comparison, Funes has made some attempt at trying to sound Obama-like during his acceptance speech. He said, "This is not time for revenge. This is a time for political understanding." To the average person, that may not seem to be a big deal, but given El Salvador tortured past, this is a tremendous statement he made.
Yeah, especially when you consider that Mauricio Funes, former journalist, as you mentioned, lost a brother during the war and was, threatened before, during, and after the war, as many of us were. And, him reaching out that way is actually just his way. And it is the way of El Salvador, where, like yesterday, I saw people in trucks waving FMLN and Arena, the right-wing parties, flags. And it's since the peace accords, especially, there's been a political space opened up that allows for certain kinds of dialogue, although there are fundamental differences, say, between the, for lack of a better word, the neoliberal free trade, big business at the expense of the 99% of the majority policies versus, say, more democratic and left-leaning policies right now.
Well, speaking of left-leaning policies, the right wing has tried to portray Funes and his supporters as being pro-Hugo Chavez, and if a win by them will plunge El Salvador into this path. Where there's a truth lies in these comments?
Well, El Salvador's relationship to Venezuela is a complex one. There are some relationships on the left. However, President-elect Funes has made clear when I interviewed him last night that his first priority is to establish a firm and solid relationship with the United States, that no country in Latin America can threaten the strong relationship that exists between two countries with shared populations, shared economies, shared interests in the region. And so it's also complex by the fact that a lot of the big businesses that are behind the Arena Party are major investors in countries like Venezuela, Cuba, and others that are the boogeymen. So, and Funes brought this out in the debate and I think made them look silly. And so the Venezuelan boogeyman didn't really work, I think. They lost.
Now, Obama has been somewhat silent about El Salvador. What kind of relationship do you expect the Obama administration to have with Funes?
I think that's the question of the moment right now, Gary. We're not sure here in El Salvador. I'm hearing what people would like would be a new relationship instead of the support for military dictatorships, the funding, training of death squads, bombings, helicopters. You know, all the apparatus of repression that existed was made in the good old USA here in El Salvador. So there's a hope that there's going to be what Funes told me last night is a new respect for the institutional integrity that's in fact never existed in El Salvador, where the legal frames, the legal structures, and the other institutional components of life here are going to be built anew in a new way because they've been dominated by such a tiny handful of interests that control most of the economy. I mean,
Roberto, I understand that there are 12 families in El Salvador that control virtually the entire economy. Can you give us a sense of who are these people and what they do?
Well, it actually used to be 14. You know, there's a myth that it was 14 families, and it was more like 30 families. And now that's been reduced actually to 4, no longer families. You know, capitalism is no longer a family thing. It's more, that is, unless your name's Murdoch. Capitalism is more about conglomerates and allied interests. And so there are about 4 different economic blocks, most of which are centered in the financial sector of the economy, as they are in the United States, for example, with Goldman Sachs and other interests that are heavily backing Obama. You know, it's the finance people. You know, it used to be the economy, stupid. Now it's the finance people. So they control the economy here right now, and their interests they feel are threatened right now by the FMLN's victory.
Roberto, El Salvador, besides the economy, security is a major, major problem. It has one of the highest crime rate in the region. Now, how does Funes tackle this problem?
I talked to him about that last night as well, and he sees as, again, fundamental as first and foremost reestablishing the institutional integrity for civil society, for civic life. If you don't have a police force that functions transparently, that functions with the law in one hand and fairness in the other, the fair application of it, you can have a problem. Or if you have a judicial system that's corrupt, that's manipulated, that, you know, there's a saying here that says that justice in El Salvador is like a snake. It only bites the barefoot. It doesn't bite the rich with boots, who can afford to wear boots. So with that, I think is the first way. I think he's saying he's going to attack it by
providing boots for those who don't have boots. Providing
boots and really raising the standard of living and building the institutional conditions for civic life. Because under the Arena Party, the FMLN will say El Salvador has become a more barbaric country, that crime rate has been absolutely a product of the Arena Party's policies.
Now, what role can the El Salvadors in America play to help El Salvador deal with its major problems?
Well, you know, Salvadorans, 2.5 million of them are not just that pathetic image of immigrants or Salvadoran immigrants that you'll see on CNN, as in when the young man that killed Chandra Levy. I mean, you know, that's not representative of the Salvadoran community. It's as diverse community as any other community, and so you have people that are a pretty interesting amount of professionals. And so I spoke to President-elect Funes, and he was telling me that he's going to be looking to this community for support, financial support, but also we're in the information age, so there's a need to build up the knowledge base of the country, and foreign immigrants in the diaspora can transfer knowledge in medicine, biotechnology, computer science, construction, you name it. So money, knowledge, and love that has never stopped flowing across borders.
Well, already El Salvadorians living in the United States sent about $20 billion or so back to El Salvador to relatives. There's a sense that maybe that number might dwindle a little bit given the economic situation we face here in the United States. Do you expect that to diminish, or do you expect it to continue at the same level it has?
It already has started diminishing clearly. I believe it's like a 4% decrease from last year to this year. And that's expected to continue through the life of this crisis in El Salvador, but also in the capitalist system itself. I mean, so let's see what happens. And what people in the FMLN are telling me is that the remittances were actually part of, say, the Arena Party's strategy to just hold up a vapid, broken economic system that they built. You know, we in the United States were actually the major sustainers, the major providers of foreign direct investment to the country.
Roberto, I read your blog on New American Media, and in one of them you hesitated about bringing some personal anecdote about the story, and you say you hesitated. I wanted to talk to you about this, one of the entries in your blog, a friend of yours who died during the Civil War. And has this election closed that wound, or is that wound still open?
Well, the wounds are, until they heal, open. And when you're talking about our dead, wherever they're from, that wound's always open for anybody that's had anybody die on them for violent causes, as 80,000 died here, or just natural causes, or you know. So that wounds, but those wounds open up, especially right now for, I think, all of us. Like last night, I talked to a lot of people, and the first people that you think about sometimes are the people who you wish could have been here. Those, for example, I was with a good friend of mine who was a former top commander in the FMLN who led several hundred troops into the capital here in the richest area in San Salvador. We were walking down the same streets that he led hundreds of guerrillas into and watched some of them die. Now, I was asking what it felt like to watch young boys, girls, women, elderly people in red shirts that say FMLN, something you could have never done before, just taking over these streets in the richest neighborhood. And it was just unbelievable for him to see. He started crying. And so, but it's a bittersweet victory, I think, for the people of El Salvador. And I thank you for the invitation.
That's all we have time for. Roberto Lovato in El Salvador, thanks for taking time to talk with us.
My pleasure.
Now, here's Abi Ishola with some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic media. From Caribbean Life, Picture the Homeless organization says Mayor Bloomberg's plan to reduce the number of homeless New Yorkers has failed. In 2004, Bloomberg vowed to have fewer than 5,000 families living in shelters, but the organization says there are over 8,000 people displaced. After months of trying to meet with the mayor, members of Picture the Homeless waited for him on a subway platform to issue him a mock eviction notice from City Hall. From the Filipino Reporter, a Filipina-American woman is on trial for stealing over $1 million from Saks Fifth Avenue during her stint as a salesperson. Cecile Villacarta has been accused of authorizing fake cash returns and issuing stolen gift cards to customers to gain more business. Villacarta was once the highest producing salesperson at the company's flagship store in Manhattan. From the Irish Voice, the director of public safety in Hoboken wants to discontinue the St. Patrick's Day parade in New Jersey. Bill Bergen, whose father was once honored at the parade, says the event has lost its meaning due to drunk and rowdy revelers who participate. Some ethnic media outlets say it's too steep to walk through the White House's open-door policy. New America Media reports that a few ethnic news organizations have been given access to the White House, but many don't have the resources and manpower to cover it, along with their communities. And finally, the next Dalai Lama may be female. iExaminer reports that after 5 decades of struggle, speculation is growing about who will be the next Tibetan leader. Last November, The current Dalai Lama hinted at a press conference that his successor will likely be the first female to take the reins. Those are just a few stories from the ethnic media. Back to you, Garry.
The main story of the day, just about every day, in mainstream and ethnic media is the ailing economy. But some critics say these stories don't focus enough on helping the average reader understand the financial crisis. Michelle García talked with two media analysts and compared coverage in the mainstream press and Chinese language newspapers.
It's been called the September 11th of Wall Street, the day that shook the nation's economy.
September 15th, 2008, the whole world stood still. Markets went to complete blind panic. Things were so bad, so out of control. It was just this complete financial contagion. You couldn't really see it, but you could almost feel it, really, especially if you live in New York.
And when the economic anvil fell, it hit readers of the mainstream and ethnic media, prompting reflections about the coverage of everyday working people. Stories from the ground, says Dean Starkman, business editor at the Columbia Journalism Review, have slowly made their way into the mainstream media.
One thing you sort of realize if you spend like 15 minutes, you know, sort of average communities or whatever, most people are really strapped, and they were really strapped before. You know, this last period of has been a period of real struggle for people.
Just a few blocks away from Wall Street, a Chinese New Year tradition that brings hope in bad times.
都是初一到初十，一般都来每间餐馆都拜年。我们就是包一个利是吧，利是就是红包，给大家互相鼓励，带来好运。
The grandeur and glamour and hardship of Chinatown covered in the pages of the Chinese press.
现在营业额大概比以前差了20%多，为了节省开支吧，只有裁员才可以。
Stories about people searching for food in dumpsters, of out-of-work restaurant workers,
比打工少一点，但是比较轻松一点工作吧。
about keeping face, dignity, while taking a job carrying a billboard.
找这样的工作也是不容易的。
But Peter Kwong says such stories belie an editorial perspective.
Mainly, all these papers still basically oriented from the merchant's perspective, from the business perspective. Whatever they do cover, to me, it's quite superficial. If you really care about your working people, you want to explain to them why is it you're in this condition here, and what can we do to resolve it. And should we go to the government to asking more fundings? Should we find ways to create jobs? None of that things covered in Chinese papers that way.
If there's a lesson to be learned, say these critics, it's that business coverage would be well served by focusing on the struggles of working people.
I think if the business press, I have to say, had been paying better attention to just the increasing distress among the broad swath of middle class, really, we'd be a lot better prepared for what's happening, and I think we'd also understand. We would also have been much more leery of this explosion in subprime lending.
But even as the economy slumps even further, from the streets can be heard an outlook of a brighter future.
按咱们易经来讲，因为今年是牛年，我觉得从今年以后，这个美国的经济可能会步步的高升。
And it's these signs of recovery that the press now clamors to hear. For independent sources, I'm Michelle García.
We'll be right back.
There is really only one boy, one girl, one tree, one forest, one ocean, one mountain, one sky, and one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups worlds are working together under one name, Earthshare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
A new visa agreement between the U.S. and Ireland will allow more Irish to come to this country each year and more Americans to work on the MOI. Ireland's Prime Minister wants to take the initiative even further. Brian Cohen was in New York for St. Patrick's Day, and he hopes he can convince the Obama administration to allow Irish workers to double the length of time they can stay in the States. Plus, he wants to ease the requirements for Irish citizenship. Abi Ishola went to the St. Patrick's Day parade to see if Irish eyes were smiling at the prospect of these new policies.
Fifth Avenue was alive with Irish pride as thousands of Irish immigrants turned out for this year's St. Patrick's Day parade. Among them were some who emigrated to the United States in the mid-1980s.
I came because the economy was bad in Ireland and opportunities were offered to me in the United States. It was an open door policy, and Ireland has always had an open door policy to the United States, so it's give and take.
That friendly give and take resurfaced this year after the U.S. and Ireland worked out a new visa program. The agreement, 20,000 Irish are permitted to come to America for 12 months, while 5,000 Americans are allowed to work in Ireland. Ireland's economy picked up in the mid-90s, but with it on the rocks once again, the country's Prime Minister, Brian Cohen, recently urged the Obama administration to extend this one-year visa agreement to 2 years. Some residents of Ireland like the idea.
I mean, I have two boys, 15 and 12, girl of 13. I'd like to think that when they're out to start to work that there is good opportunities from them, and with the injection of other nations as well, it's going to be really, really good again.
Some Irish revelers at the St. Patrick's Day parade say Ireland needs the United States now more than ever.
I know worldwide economies are not good at present, but the Irish economy suffers a lot more because it's a small economy, like we're an island nation.
And how the Irish economy went from boom to bust is still a surprise to some.
We are after 10 years of phenomenal growth, and this growth just overnight absolutely went out overnight, just like someone knocked off a light.
Mortgages are absolutely huge in the Republic as well. You know, everything have gone way OTT. The cost of living as well, mortgages way over.
Our government aren't satisfying the Irish people at the moment.
Despite problems on the Emerald Isle, some aren't convinced that tweaking immigration law is the answer.
Well, at the moment I think it's probably a useless option for Irish people, because from what we've read and heard about the American economy, it's similar to the Irish economy at the moment.
Abi Ishola for Independent Sources.
You promised me the world. Is this what you had in mind?
Every choice we make has a consequence. Help Earthshare and its members restore balance to the world. Visit earthshare.org and see what you can do. Earthshare, one environment, one simple way to care for it.
Unlike most publications, France-Amérique had a peculiar challenge. Their readership base was increasing, but circulation was dwindling. So, Louis Kyle, an American entrepreneur, bought the newspaper and turned it into a snazzy magazine with a strong website. I recently visited France-Amérique's offices in Manhattan to find out how this experiment is working. 3 years ago, it seemed as if everyone wanted to get out of the publishing world. But Louis Kyle dove right in, buying France-Amérique, a struggling publication.
It was a bit of a contrarian play, I agree. But it's the only magazine group publishing for the French community and the American Francophile community in the United States. So it was a niche play that made sense.
Kyle, a Francophile American from Philadelphia, gradually transformed the biweekly newspaper from newsprint to a high-gloss monthly magazine. That allowed France-Amérique to woo and land high-end brand advertisers that shun the newsprint version.
was a weekly whose distribution was progressively going down, and we were convinced that was because of the internet. Today, to be news, you have to be more urgent than a weekly can provide. So we had to find a balance between serving the news which was relevant and also providing an environment for advertisers, because the model requires having subscriptions as well as advertising.
Carl hired Jean-Cosme Delaloye, a Swiss journalist, as editor-in-chief to lead a revamped staff of reporters and editors working in Paris, New York, and other American cities.
My mission was to take the magazine to the next stage because we changed the format in last May. We became monthly, and we wanted to focus more on French news in America, focus on the French community, and go find people where they are, and do some more in-depth reporting about this community.
Indeed, France-Amérique, which was started in 1943, has remade itself à la Vanity Fair. The magazine is peppered with stories about French basketball players in the NBA, a profile of a French cowboy in Texas, and a Q&A with actress Sophie Marceau. They've also adopted the American style of writing, short, declarative sentences. But the jury on this experiment is still out.
There's a lot of movement right now, you know, we did a survey in November, and it was after 4 issues, and quite a few people regretted the old format. They regretted the frequency because it used to come out twice a month, and now it's only monthly.
I know the French can be very particular about their language. Being in America, an American-based publication, do you find yourself inserting American words in your copy?
We try not to, because one of the audiences of France-Amérique is our classes, the students. And France-Amérique is used throughout the US to teach French by teachers. And they want us to use French words, you know. It's the temptation to say an interview, for example, instead of an entretien, which is the French word, is big. And it's a daily struggle not to insert English words into our stories. But we pay attention to that.
France-Amérique's business model of retooling its print publication and sharpening its web presence is one that both ethnic and mainstream publications are considering. That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. In the meantime, be independent-minded.